Hello, and welcome to Monarchist Minute, Royalist News in the US of A. This is episode 3, and I am Victor Smith. Today, we would like to, on this first Friday in September, inform you that September is Suicide Prevention Month. And if you or someone you know has had suicidal thoughts or tendencies, please do all of us a favor and call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline in an attempt to get help. Also, we would like to extend our condolences as the Monarchist America to Princess Cecilia of the House of Bourbon Parma. She passed away this Wednesday. Cecilia was the sister to the current officially recognized Carlist claimant. And Hurricane Ida swept the country this week, landing in New Orleans and the remnants making it as far up as New York City, putting lots of flooding in the New York tri-state area. On Wednesday, Baltimore had multiple tornado warnings. Just going to show you how powerful Ida was. And if you would like to donate to Hurricane Ida relief efforts, you can go to redcross.org/Ida, IDA, in order to donate monetarily. And now we will get to our primary topic of the day, the new Texas abortion legislation. The Supreme Court had a case offered to it that it declined to hear, apparently citing that they wish to wait for a case to make it up for the lower courts. The new Texas abortion law bans abortion after 6 weeks, except in cases of rape or incest, and it also includes a ban when a heartbeat can be heard on an ultrasound. So 6 weeks or a heartbeat, except in cases of rape and incest. William Stow cannot be with us today, so replacing him on the panel is the leader of Monarchist Action, Jesse, as well as John Armas, who cannot be here today. This was a last-minute thing, so we could not replace him. We will go to our guest, Jesse, for his thoughts.
Well, I'm going to start talking about the abortion law with the issues involving that. So I'd like to bring up a few comments that there's already been marches against this sort of thing, and I feel like it really goes against the values of the United States of America. Particularly the concept of a guarantee to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, particularly the first given right to all Americans. So I think that it needs to be more carefully considered, and I hope that the powers that be make a decision that is ultimately right for all of us. Regardless of the possibility of that, I do hope that at least something comes of this. Some sort of consensus is attained. And I will pass it off to Charles, and we will see. What do you have to say about this?
I think that this is definitely a step in the right direction for this Texas, and hopefully, if it does ultimately come to the Supreme Court, they will overturn Roe v. Wade and all the other precedent that is that allows abortion. It really is on the one hand, it's heartwarming to see that this sort of stuff is getting passed. On the other hand, it's disgusting to see that there are those who advocate for abortion and the slaughtering of the future of our country. But but it is a step in the right direction. Hooray, Texas! They continue to be, at least for now, one of the best states in the union.
And just of note, the South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem has asked her people to look into the Texas law to see if she can in an attempt to beat the Texas law to take Texas's place as having the most restrictive abortion law in America.
If
I
I
like
may
this guy.
comment on that,
Of
it
course,
appears that they're not the only ones. There is a full list of 6 states that are rushing to pass this sorts of legislation, including North Dakota, South Dakota, Mississippi, Indiana, Arkansas, and Florida. They have all begun looking into the possibility of mimicking the law and trying to find any way to adopt it and their own domestic legislation. So let's hope that that goes well for them in their investigation of the, I suppose, the semantics, practicality, and the legality of that.
of course. And that was our only really deep dive thing for the day. Of course, I don't want to get into the religion. I don't want to get into the religious aspect of abortion on this podcast, but we don't really need to get into religion to discuss what abortion has wrought for our nation.
Yeah, as I stated previously, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those
Of
are the
course.
key principles we must keep in mind, and those are the three principles that we must deeply consider to be the foundation of all other key concepts and legislation. Does it preserve and protect life? Does it preserve and protect liberty? And does it allow for the pursuit of happiness?
Yeah. It is interesting to see that a certain group of people, just because of circumstances beyond their control, are being denied, their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness without due process of law. And it is precisely this group which has committed absolutely no crime whatsoever. It is one of the most, I would say, not necessarily ironic, but one of the weirdest cases of mental gymnastics, that this, of all the groups, is the one we're going to deny. We're going to deny their basic rights. It's something else.
All right, and now I believe we are done with that. If you'd like to ask questions, if you're listening, please go to either the conference text chat to text your questions, or if you're joining us in the conference room, request to speak, and we will get to you.
And I guess that if nobody wants to, considering we have a one-person audience, not counting the bot, of course, our beloved Craig, who is
Yes.
digitally.
All right. Now it looks like we have no questions. So
Do we want to discuss anything else? If we can just have a free monarchist think tank moment on some general monarchist topics, I guess, if you want.
So I actually was thinking about something earlier today. If we're going to talk about some other things, I was really thinking about the kind of structure of the foundation of the United States in regards to kind of bases or sort of inspirations from history, I've been considering some things about the foundation, and particularly regarding the structuring of the United States when it was originally founded. Particularly the idea that if you really look at the structure of the United States, the early pre-Constitution, like Articles of Confederation, United States, what is supposed to be, you will note that there were several factors present in the early United States government, such as the Electoral College, which still exists to this day. And if you really look and compare, it is remarkably similar to how elections would work in the Holy Roman Empire. And
Yes.
I feel like that's a very interesting thing, because the more you kind of draw the connection of Holy Roman Empire to early United States, early Republic, you see that it's kind of the United States is the Republican brother or sister state to the Holy Roman Empire because of the structuring, because of the kind of focus on having designated territories and things like that, like the states, the states beforehand, like the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and how they were all fairly independent and autonomous in the early republic before the Constitution, just as the kingdoms, bishoprics, duchies, grand duchies, fiefdoms, and such in the Holy Roman Empire acted very independently of imperial authority while still being under imperial authority. And I find that very interesting because the presidential role looks almost like that of a monarch or a reigning kind of Holy Roman Emperor, where he has ultimate say and authority, but it's more so delegated to the local powers that be. And in terms of like, if there's an emergency, then you turn to like working together on that ultimate power structure. It's just very remarkably similar to the late Holy Roman Empire before its
Well,
dividing
I'm
with its decentralization.
well, I'm going to actually have to push back on that because the founders didn't really see the president as having as much power as he does today. Because they rebelled against a monarchical government, they saw the king as having way too much power, therefore the
That's
Articles of Confederation.
That is actually where I
Not,
must disagree with
yeah,
you,
yes,
because one of their main problems was that the king, while he had power, was refusing to exercise it. Everything, well, in the Declaration of Independence, it's all the problems that are listed that ultimately lead to independence are all these complaints. They are blamed on the king, but in actuality, these were all acts of parliament. They were just blamed on the king because he kind of let them happen under his watch.
yes, and
So
yeah,
it really um really what they were against was a centralized parliamentarian dominance over everything, which sort of led to the balance of powers, arguably the idea that we need to have multiple branches of government, so that you couldn't, just have Congress or dictate everything.
to
And
add
we
on.
would like to, and I would like to just introduce Vincent. He requested to speak. Vincent, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was a little bit surprised by the comparison to the Holy Roman Empire. I'm not a scholar on the Holy Roman Empire. I don't know a whole hell of a lot about it, but I do know that the reputation that the HRE has is one in which the emperor is a notoriously weak figurehead leader. The example, of course, being that the German states under the emperor have their own armies, and that the emperor retains the authority only to levy the armies organized by the states. In this respect, it has more in common with the Articles government of the very early United States, but that's not the main point that I wanted to make. The point that I think that we're sort of dancing around by making the comparison to the Holy Roman Empire is that we have what I sometimes refer to in this country as an 8-year emperor. Especially with the expansion of executive orders. The president of today has near absolute power. And what's more, our system of government has so much to do with public opinion that the scope of the president's powers is actually at any given time deeply in doubt. Because if the president is unpopular, then there's more likely to be a legislative crackdown on him than there is if he is popular.
But
I
of
don't remember if I
course,
said that right or if I said that backwards.
but of course, most public opinion polls have their opinion of Congress being exceedingly low, and however, the opinion of their own congressman is typically high.
Yeah.
I would actually like to bring up a point. Vincent, if you recall, I specifically mentioned, I just wanted to bring this up to kind of bring it to your attention. I was comparing the late Holy Roman Empire to the early American Republic, specifically pre-Constitution. I said this several times, because if you look at America under the Articles of Confederation, before the Constitution, under the Articles of Confederation, and then you look at it, the Holy Roman Empire, let's look at the Holy Roman Empire in the same year as America in like 1776. If you compare the systems, they are incredibly similar because
You're referring to the Articles government. Well, this was the point that I was trying to make. I didn't realize that you had already made that distinction yourself. So we're in agreement on this matter.
Yes.
Well, in any event, referring back to the United States of today and the commentary that I made about the concept of an 8-year emperor, this has everything to do, in my opinion, with sort of public opinion and political expediency. Namely, that there is an expectation in the country today that the president is supposed to solve all of your problems. The average American, and I wish I could pull up some statistics on this at a moment's notice, but I didn't know I was going to be having specifically this conversation. Probably only votes during presidential elections. And we know that there's a lot more public involvement when it comes to presidential elections than it does with any other type of election, despite the fact that of those types of elections, your local representative or your state governor is supposed to have a lot more functional power than your president ever is. Because the expectations have changed, we have allowed the power of the president to expand over time. Now, I do not want to frame this as an issue of public ignorance, because I don't believe that is the issue. We've never known republics in the history of the world to not expand their powers over time. And one of the reasons is because they have to promise, the leaders of republics have to promise more and more to their constituents every couple of years, every election cycle, in order to secure their seat. They have to promise to do more than their rival, and so on and so forth. So the pattern that we see in republics is that governments continue to expand over time.
Or in the case, sorry to cut you off, Vincent, or in the case of 2020, you just have to promise that you are literally not the other guy.
Well, the point is, one of the reasons that I joined the monarchist movement is because I've been personally disillusioned with the influence that our elections have over the nation itself. We have near dictatorial expectations for our elected leaders, and partisanship continues to widen that gap, such that the path that we are currently leading ourselves down is the path of dictatorship. Many people assume, because I am a monarchist, that I am an authoritarian. That couldn't be farther from the truth. I am anti-authoritarian, and I believe that having a more responsible, more restrained type of government will lead to greater personal freedom for the average individual than our current system will.
So let's discuss your ideal monarchical system then, Vincent. What would you like to see, and what is your ideal monarchical system of government? Like, describe that.
Well, I'm a very practical person, and that means that I want to find the quickest and simplest path to monarchy from where we are presently. And that means that usually when
I didn't ask for practicality, I asked for ideal.
Well, that being the case, I've never really bothered to explore specifically that question. because my practical focus has sort of led me to eschew ideal in favor of what's doable.
Yeah.
And the
Okay.
reason I bring that up is because when I talk to other people about my monarchism, and I talk about it to as many people as possible, just because we're still in the stage where raising awareness is probably our primary objective. But the point is, when I talk about it, I usually tell people that the first step we need to do is we need to replace the executive office. Now, that's the president, with a hereditary position. But I always preface that by saying that we need to, and this is something that I personally have not done yet, but we need to review the powers given to our executive and reduce the scope of those powers. But ultimately, I believe that the monarchical position should be or should wield executive power. So, for example, I'm not entirely averse to the idea of abolishing executive order almost entirely, or at the very least, laying out clearly what the scope of the power executive, how much power executive orders should have. Because right now, that's the primary reason I describe the presidency as an 8-year emperor position, is just simply
Or 4-year.
because the executive order alone does almost whatever you say it does. And it allows the president to be a policy maker rather than a policy enforcer. And I believe that the executive office should be for people who enforce policy rather than people who make it. That means that ultimately sorry?
Of course, that would also mean that Congress would have to do their jobs and pass actual legislation instead of leaving it up to the president to do executive orders.
Well, that's right, and I believe that is very possible for a couple of reasons. One is that we've shifted the first thing I'll say is that Congress does much more than the average member of the public actually believes that they do. They pass legislation every day or every week or something like that, but they're doing it all the time. And as a matter of fact, a huge percentage of the legislation they pass is bipartisan, and that's something that a lot of people don't know. The point is they actually, to some extent, are doing their jobs, and that we just don't hear about it in the media because the media tends to be partisan. But more to the point, I believe that the legislature is actually more capable than we realize, because I also believe that the legislature is under the influences or the negative influences of a partisan republic. One of those being that the power of the president and the presidential office has drawn attention away from the legislature, such that there isn't enough interest in the legislative branch for the general public to become involved. It's sort of like, why is the legislative offices so slow to adapt to the times, and why are they not as action focused as we want them to be? Well, it's because people aren't paying attention to them. And I think if we didn't place all of our faith in the president, people would start to notice that your state representative, your state senator, is the person that's supposed to represent you more than the president is. So I think that alone,
if we expand this nationally, your congressman is supposed to represent you on national issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that would arise naturally if you took some attention away from the office of the president by having it be a non-elected office that does its job as it was written to do. So that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is, hopefully having a powerful monarch will reduce partisanism in general and allow for a broader scope of bipartisan effort. Like I said, there's more bipartisanism in Washington than most people realize, but there's still too much partisanism. And more importantly, it's getting worse all the time. So that pattern of bipartisan legislation may not continue, and we need to be taking steps to making sure that it does continue and that it gets better.
And of course, when I was in college, I was a political science major, and we discussed in my one-on-one class polarization. And the polarization this country has been on since at least Reagan has been huge. Like, it's either everybody is either on one extreme or the other extreme. Think about what happened in the 2020 election. Had the election gone the other way, you may have seen a similar type of reaction from people on the left or the far left that you saw with the Trumpsters on the right. That they claim of course, the people who are radically for Trump believe still that the election was stolen from him and that he won, some even claim by a landslide.
Yes,
Now,
Well, that's right. And I think what we're reaching right now as a society is we're reaching sort of what I would call late Roman Republic stages.
yes,
Because we haven't quite reached the stage, I think, where um, candidates are
Rubicon.
openly backed by violent mobs. But one of the patterns that you're starting to see, at least right now, is this idea that political candidates are willing to stand up for, and in some cases advocate on behalf of, the violent mobs that support them. So we have left-wing violent mobs that left-wing leaders insist are mostly peaceful, and we have right-wing violent mobs that right-wing leaders are also willing to designate as peaceful protests. And it's entirely dictated by political expediency. If they're on my side, it doesn't count as violence, is the attitude that we're starting to see among our leadership. And it's sort of like, if things continue on their present trajectory, which they almost definitely will if history is our guide, then we're going to reach a stage very soon where political candidates are openly backed by violent mobs. And like I said before, that's how dictatorships start.
and
we can go. Sorry.
Jesse, you can go because he hasn't spoken in a while.
I was just gonna say, so would you say that we're entering a sort of late the Republican era in which more like a Weimar type thing where it started out okay, but it's deteriorating quickly to an extent that there's like mobs forming, two sides, kind of like
the Weimar Republic
getting...
is a very the Weimar Republic is a very unique creature because it was formed against the will of the German public. The American Republic I would not compare to the Weimar Republic simply on account of the fact that the average American has faith in democratic institutions. Now, the form that faith takes is one that increasingly is becoming partisan political. And what I mean by that is one of the things that we often hear in presidential farewell speeches in particular is this idea that we have to protect our democracy by being vigilant against its enemies, that we always have to have faith.
Of course, Washington's farewell address is the most important one that we should be reading. Washington actually, in his farewell address, decried political parties and warned Americans about the dangers of political parties. Of course, Americans did not listen.
Well, that's right. And if you ever read the Federalist Papers, you'll realize that a lot of your leading Federalists, like Alexander Hamilton, believed that the larger the republic, the less likely it would be for political parties to form. The reason I bring that up is because our founding fathers counted on political parties not existing, and they're wrong about that. And I think that is sowing the seeds of our destruction. If the founders were right, I would be a diehard Republican, but the fact is they weren't. And we need to be looking for more realistic solutions.
The thing is that the founding fathers were brilliant men, but the problem, generally speaking, is that key assumptions of theirs were proven to be false. My most notable one was this is also in the Federalist Papers, the assumption that the different branches of government will always try to fight each other. They never realized that, partly because they never thought partisanship would take root, or they assumed that the American people would be able to resist. They never realized that Congress and the president could work together in order to not work against the interests of the American people. The idea that they stopped trying to usurp power from each other, although that still goes on. They now are usurping power from the other levels of governance and just flat out inventing powers. The founding fathers would never have predicted that, which is sad.
And
But
of course, I should probably make mention, somebody who's listening said, didn't most of the founding fathers believe that only a handful of common men had the right and duty to lead the rest of the nation?
Yes, particularly landowners.
yes, well, and then it's also our current republic is a lot more democratic than they ever would have anticipated.
Yes, especially with the
Our
direct election of senators.
Oh, yes, and the fact that rather than the Electoral College being a useful tool to help prevent the mob from selecting, a terrible person, the Electoral College has essentially just become a confirmation of the popular vote most of the time, with the odd exception of 2016 and 3 or 4 other elections before that.
Yes.
That's right. The election
that was
Richard Nixon had at least one what they called a faithless elector.
Yeah. So the problem is that a lot of what they set up isn't working as intended, which is partly how we've gotten here.
Yes,
But
and
that just means
yeah,
that unfortunately we have to face this reality that their assumptions are wrong, which there's something deeply unsettling about that as an American, because it used to be, I don't think it's this way anymore, but we used to be brought up to, admire these men as some of the greatest thinkers of all time, which I'm not saying that they're idiots or anything.
Well,
I mean,
I do still think that they are the greatest thinkers of all time.
Yeah.
And to use Rome as a comparison again, I believe that it was critical that America had a republic when it did, and that it's just time to transition to something new. Because what having a republic has done, and what being a republic for so long has done, is it's created a foundation of human rights and of popular sovereignty that I believe deserves to stay.
yeah,
There need to be checks and balances on popular sovereignty itself, but I'm grateful that we have a foundation of human rights to go on, and that people like you and I can contemplate what it means to best preserve those rights.
yes, and I think that is a wonderful place to wrap things up. Thank you to everybody who participated, and thank you to everyone listening to us on YouTube on Mondays, and everybody here listening in the Discord server now. If you'd like to join us live, you can do so Friday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern in the Monarchist of America Discord server. And now we will close in prayer in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Ghost.
Amen. All right, that wraps things up. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.